The message arrived on a Tuesday morning at precisely 00:09:47 Greenwich Mean Time, though time seemed meaningless when the fate of an entire civilization hung in the balance. Dr. Sarah Chen was sipping her third cup of coffee at the SETI monitoring station in New Mexico when the computers began screaming with alerts she had never heard before. The transmission was unlike anything they had ever received. It came not as the usual radio waves or electromagnetic signals, but as a direct neural interface that somehow bypassed their equipment entirely and spoke directly to every human mind on Earth simultaneously. The voice that echoed in billions of heads was melodic yet desperate, carrying undertones of fear that transcended species barriers. "People of Earth," the voice began, its words forming perfectly in every human language simultaneously. "We are the Zorvani Federation, representatives of 47 peaceful worlds in what you call the Andromeda Galaxy. We come to you not as conquerors or visitors, but as desperate souls pleading for salvation." Sarah dropped her coffee mug, the ceramic shattering on the concrete floor as she stared at her instruments. Every screen in the facility was displaying the same impossible readings. This wasn't just a message. It was a technological miracle that demonstrated capabilities far beyond human understanding. The voice continued, and with it came images that appeared directly in human minds. Vast cities of crystal and light, floating gardens that defied gravity, beings of incredible beauty with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to glow with inner wisdom. But these peaceful scenes were quickly replaced by horror. Dark ships the size of moons, creatures that seemed to be made of living shadow, and the systematic destruction of world after world. "For 300 of your years, we have been hunted by the Devourers. They are an ancient evil that consumes not just worlds, but the very life force of entire civilizations. They have already taken 18 of our member worlds, along with billions of souls. Our fleets, mighty though they were, cannot stand against their endless hunger." The images shifted again, showing space battles of unimaginable scale. Ships that dwarfed Earth's largest cities exchanged weapons that could crack planets. But for all their technological superiority, the Zorvani were losing. Their elegant vessels, designed for exploration and peaceful contact, were being overwhelmed by the brutal efficiency of the Devourer fleet. President Martinez was in the middle of a cabinet meeting when the transmission began. Secret Service agents reached for their weapons, unsure how to protect against a threat that existed inside everyone's mind. But as the message continued, the president raised his hand for calm. This wasn't an attack. It was a cry for help, unlike anything in human history. "We have searched the galaxy for allies," the Zorvani voice continued. "But most species flee when they learn of the Devourers. Others simply lack the particular qualities necessary to face such an enemy. But our deep space reconnaissance has revealed something extraordinary about your species, something that gives us hope." The images changed once more, showing Earth from space. But this wasn't the beautiful blue marble that humans were used to seeing in photographs. This was Earth as the aliens saw it, a death world of impossible extremes. Hurricanes that could level continents, volcanoes that spewed destruction across vast distances, earthquakes that reshaped land masses, and most terrifying of all, the countless ways that life on Earth had adapted not just to survive, but to thrive in such a hostile environment. "Your world is what we classify as a Class 12 death world," the voice explained with something resembling awe. "Only 3 such planets have ever been discovered, and yours is by far the most extreme. The fact that intelligent life evolved there, let alone achieved space travel, defies all our understanding of probability. Your species has been forged in a crucible of violence that would destroy most civilizations before they could even develop written language. Admiral Patricia Stone was aboard the International Space Station when the transmission reached her. As the head of the newly formed United Earth Space Force, she understood the implications immediately. The aliens weren't just asking for help. They were specifically asking for human help because of their unique nature as survivors of a death world. The images now showed human history from an alien perspective. Wars that seemed primitive by galactic standards took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of survival. The fact that humans had fought each other for millennia while simultaneously building civilizations, creating art, and reaching for the stars painted a picture of a species uniquely adapted for both destruction and creation. "We have observed your military capabilities," the Zorvani continued. "Your weapons, while crude by our standards, are designed with a brutal efficiency that our peaceful minds struggle to comprehend. Your soldiers fight not just for victory, but for the very right to exist. This is something the Devourers understand, but have never faced from prey species." In war rooms around the globe, military leaders were already running calculations. Humanity's space-based assets were limited: a handful of orbital platforms, the lunar research stations, and the experimental deep space vessels that were still in testing phases. Compared to civilizations that had been traveling between stars for millennia, human technology seemed laughably primitive. But the Zorvani saw something else entirely. They saw a species that had turned scarcity into strength, that had made weapons out of desperate necessity, and that had never learned the concept of acceptable losses. When humans went to war, they brought everything they had and refused to stop until the enemy was completely defeated. "The Devourers are approaching our core worlds," the voice said, and now the desperation was unmistakable. "They will reach our homeworld of Zorva Prime in what you measure as 6 of your months. Our remaining fleets will make a final stand, but without aid, our civilization will join the 18 worlds already consumed." The transmission then shifted to include technical data, star charts, fleet compositions, and detailed analyses of Devourer tactics. The information flowed directly into human military computers and the minds of scientists worldwide. It was clear that the Zorvani had done their research. They weren't just asking for help, they were providing everything humanity would need to make an informed decision. Dr. Chen found herself appointed as the chief liaison to the Alien Contact Committee that formed within hours of the transmission's end. Scientists, military officials, and world leaders gathered in an emergency session at the United Nations. The question before them was simple in concept, but staggering in scope. Could humanity, a species that had barely achieved stable space travel, take on an enemy that had been terrorizing advanced civilizations for centuries? The debate raged for hours. Some argued that it was impossible. Humanity lacked the ships, the weapons, and the technology to make a meaningful difference in a galactic war. Others pointed out the opportunity for technological advancement that cooperation with an advanced civilization could provide. But as the discussion continued, a different perspective began to emerge. General Harrison, a veteran of 3 terrestrial wars, stood up in the assembly and delivered words that would echo through history. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at this all wrong. They're not asking us to be like them. They're asking us to be exactly what we are, the survivors of a death world that never learned how to give up." The revelation was stunning. Humanity didn't need to match the technological sophistication of galactic civilizations. They needed to do what they had always done: take whatever tools were available and use them in ways no one else had thought possible. The Zorvani had advanced ships and weapons, but they lacked the tactical mindset that came from evolving on a planet where every day was a fight for survival. As the emergency session continued through the night, reports began flowing in from around the globe. Every major space agency, military organization, and research institution was working around the clock to assess what humanity could contribute to such a massive undertaking. The answer was both humbling and extraordinary. Humanity's total space-based military assets consisted of 12 orbital defense platforms, 3 lunar military bases, and exactly 47 combat-capable spacecraft. By galactic standards, it was barely enough to defend a single moon. But Earth's military leaders weren't thinking in terms of conventional galactic warfare. They were thinking like humans, apex predators from a death world that had learned to turn every disadvantage into a tactical opportunity. The final decision came at dawn, delivered by President Martinez in a speech that was broadcast to every human on Earth and transmitted directly to the waiting Zorvani fleet. "To our new friends among the stars," she began, "humanity accepts your call for aid. We may be a young species with primitive tools, but we are the children of a world that taught us one fundamental truth. When something threatens what you care about, you don't measure the odds. You gather everything you have, and you fight." The response from the Zorvani was immediate and overwhelming. Joy, relief, and gratitude flooded the neural link they had established, accompanied by detailed coordinates for rendezvous points and technical specifications for integrating human forces with their remaining fleets. But beneath the alien gratitude was something else, a growing realization of what they had just unleashed. Admiral Stone received her orders within hours. Mobilize every combat-capable vessel in the human fleet and prepare for immediate deployment to coordinates far beyond anything humans had ever attempted. The logistics were staggering. Humanity would be committing virtually their entire space-based military force to a battle light years from home, with no guarantee of return. But as word of the mission spread through military bases around the globe, something unprecedented happened. Volunteers began stepping forward in numbers that exceeded the available positions by more than 10 to 1. Pilots, Marines, engineers, and support personnel all demanded the right to be part of humanity's first interstellar war. The selection process became not about finding people willing to go, but about choosing from the thousands who refused to be left behind. Dr. Chen found herself appointed to the scientific advisory team that would accompany the fleet. Her background in xenology and communications made her invaluable for interfacing with their alien allies. But as she prepared for a journey that would take her farther from Earth than any human had ever traveled, she couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was about to prove something significant about itself to the galaxy at large. The Zorvani had called for help from the survivors of a death world. What they were about to receive was something far more dangerous than they had imagined. An entire species that had spent millennia learning how to turn impossible odds into victory through sheer relentless determination. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth was classified as the most dangerous planet ever discovered, and why the species that evolved there had never met a fight they weren't willing to finish. The transformation of Luna Base Alpha from a research station into a military staging ground happened with the kind of desperate efficiency that only humans seemed capable of achieving. Within 72 hours of the president's announcement, every available transport was ferrying personnel and equipment to the moon. The quiet corridors that had once echoed with the conversations of scientists now rang with the boots of Marines and the hum of weapons being calibrated for use in environments no human had ever imagined. Commander Jack Rivers stood in the observation deck of the newly commissioned UES Indomitable, watching as the last of humanity's space fleet assembled in lunar orbit. 47 ships. It was a number that would have been laughable to any galactic civilization, but to the humans preparing for their first interstellar war, it represented the sum total of everything they had built and dreamed of since first reaching for the stars. The ships themselves were a testament to human engineering philosophy. Where alien vessels prioritized elegance and efficiency, human ships were built like the tools of a species that expected everything to try to kill them. The Indomitable herself was a converted asteroid mining ship, her hull reinforced with layers of armor that made her look more like a flying mountain than a spacecraft. Her weapon systems had been hastily upgraded with the best technology Earth could provide, creating a vessel that was ungainly, brutal, and utterly effective. "Commander," came the voice of Lieutenant Sarah Park, his communications officer. "We're receiving a transmission from the Zorvani Advance Fleet. They're requesting permission to begin technological integration procedures." Rivers nodded, though his stomach tightened with anticipation. The Zorvani had arrived 3 days earlier, their ships appearing in the outer solar system like silver ghosts emerging from hyperspace. The lead vessel alone was larger than most human cities, its crystalline hull catching and reflecting sunlight in ways that hurt to look at directly. But despite their technological superiority, the aliens had approached with something approaching reverence. The first face-to-face meeting between humans and Zorvani had taken place aboard Luna Base Alpha, and it had been unlike anything the alien diplomatic protocols had prepared for. Ambassador Veltar, the Zorvani representative, stood nearly 8 feet tall with skin that seemed to shift between silver and blue depending on the angle of the light. Their features were elegant and refined, speaking to millions of years of peaceful evolution. When Veltar first saw Admiral Stone, the alien had actually taken a step backward, not from fear, but from something closer to awe. "Forgive me," Veltar had said in English that was perfectly accented despite being learned from intercepted broadcasts. "Our cultural histories speak of warrior species, but we had thought them to be myths. You carry yourself like predator and protector simultaneously. It is unsettling." Admiral Stone had smiled grimly at the observation. "Ambassador, where we come from, those aren't different things. They're survival skills." Now, as the technological integration began, that difference in perspective was becoming even more apparent. The Zorvani ships were marvels of engineering, faster-than-light drives that bent space itself, energy shields that could deflect asteroid impacts, and weapons that could precision target a single building from orbit. But they had been designed by a species that viewed warfare as a regrettable necessity, something to be conducted with minimum force and maximum efficiency. Human ships, by contrast, were designed by a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of destroying things that were trying to destroy them. Every human vessel carried weapons that were designed not just to disable enemy ships, but to ensure they could never threaten anyone again. The humans had taken the concept of overkill and elevated it to an art form. Dr. Chen found herself aboard the UES Relentless, serving as the scientific liaison for the integration process. Watching Zorvani engineers attempt to interface their advanced technology with human weapon systems was like watching artists trying to collaborate with demolitions experts. The aliens would propose elegant solutions that minimized collateral damage, while human engineers would immediately ask how they could make those same solutions more destructive. "Your particle beam weapons are remarkably sophisticated," Dr. Chen explained to Chief Engineer Tolovan, a Zorvani whose specialization was energy systems. "But our people have some questions about power output limitations." Tolovan's large eyes blinked slowly. "Limitations?" "Dr. Chen, these weapons can disable a ship while leaving the crew unharmed. They are perfectly calibrated for non-lethal engagement." Lieutenant Commander Morrison, the human weapons specialist, looked up from his calculations. "That's great, but can we remove those limitations? We're not really interested in non-lethal options here." The silence that followed was profound. Tolovan stared at Morrison as if the human had just suggested they set fire to the universe. "Remove the limitations? But that would make the weapons capable of completely destroying enemy vessels." "Exactly," Morrison replied with the kind of cheerful enthusiasm usually reserved for discussing vacation plans. "How quickly can we get that modification implemented across the fleet?" It was becoming clear to the Zorvani that they had not simply gained allies. They had allied themselves with a species that approached warfare from a fundamentally different perspective. Where the Zorvani sought to minimize destruction, humans sought to maximize it against anyone who threatened what they protected. The philosophical differences extended beyond weapons systems. Human tactical doctrine, when translated into galactic standard terminology, read like the fevered dreams of a militant civilization. Concepts like acceptable losses, strategic withdrawal, and proportional response were present in human military thinking, but only as backup options when total victory wasn't achievable. Captain Maria Santos, commander of the UES Retribution, found herself in a strategy session with Zorvani Fleet Commander Zephyros, discussing approach vectors for the upcoming battle. The Zorvani commander was explaining their traditional fleet formations when Santos interrupted with a question that would haunt alien military strategists for generations. "Commander Zephyros, what's your doctrine for boarding enemy vessels?" The alien's expression shifted through several emotions that humans couldn't identify. "Boarding? Dr. Santos, we do not. Our species does not engage in direct physical combat. Our weapons are designed to disable enemy ships from a distance." Santos nodded thoughtfully. "Right. That makes sense for you. But what happens if you disable a devourer ship and there are still hostiles on board?" We would attempt to communicate with them, negotiate a surrender." The human captain leaned back in her chair, and every Zorvani in the room could sense the predatory satisfaction that radiated from her. "Well, that's one approach. Our Marines prefer a more direct method. They call it aggressive negotiations." Within hours, word of human boarding tactics had spread through the Zorvani fleet. The idea that the humans actually planned to physically enter enemy vessels and engage in hand-to-hand combat was so foreign to Zorvani thinking that they initially assumed it was a translation error. When they realized it wasn't, the aliens began to understand exactly what kind of allies they had found. The journey to the battle zone would take 6 weeks using Zorvani hyperspace technology. Human ships, originally designed for operations within the solar system, had to be extensively modified to survive the transition. But the modifications weren't just technological, they were philosophical. The Zorvani had to completely restructure their fleet formations to accommodate vessels that were designed to close with the enemy and keep fighting until one side or the other was completely eliminated. Dr. Chen spent most of the journey documenting the cultural exchange between the two species. What she witnessed was unlike anything in the history of xenological studies. The Zorvani were trying to understand a species that had weaponized everything from their entertainment to their sports. Human recreational activities included something called extreme fighting, where individuals voluntarily engaged in combat for enjoyment. The aliens were particularly disturbed by human music, specifically the genres that humans listened to before going into combat. When Zorvani cultural analysts heard songs like "For Whom the Bell Tolls" or "Thunderstruck," they required extensive psychological counseling. The idea that humans actually enjoyed music about warfare and death was so far outside Zorvani comprehension that they initially thought it was some form of psychological conditioning. But perhaps the most shocking discovery came when the Zorvani observed human combat training exercises. During the journey to the battle zone, human Marines continued their regular training routines. These included something called war games, simulated combat scenarios where humans pretended to kill each other for practice. The Zorvani watched in fascination and horror as human soldiers moved through these exercises with enthusiasm and creativity. "They enjoy this," observed senior analyst Mordeth to Dr. Ah Chen during one such exercise. "Your species actually finds pleasure in simulated violence." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "It's more complex than that. We find satisfaction in improving our ability to protect what we care about. The violence isn't the goal. Survival is. But yes, we do tend to approach survival with more enthusiasm than most species probably would." The breakthrough in understanding came during the fourth week of the journey. A Devourer scout ship appeared on long-range sensors, moving on an intercept course with the combined fleet. It was smaller than the main battle group, but still larger than any human vessel. The Zorvani prepared for evasive maneuvers, standard procedure when facing superior enemy forces. Captain Rivers, commanding the lead human squadron, had a different idea. All human vessels, this is indomitable. We have a single enemy scout, perfect opportunity for a field test. Form up for assault formation. Commander Rivers, came Veltar's voice over the communication channel. That vessel is heavily armed and has superior technology. Standard doctrine suggests avoiding engagement. Rivers' response would become legendary in human military history. Ambassador, there's something you need to understand about humans. We don't have a standard doctrine for avoiding fights. We have 47 different ways to start them. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The Devourer scout ship, expecting to face the usual Zorvani evasion tactics, instead found itself surrounded by human vessels that closed distance with suicidal aggression. Human weapons, enhanced with Zorvani technology, but modified for maximum destructive potential, tore through the scouts' defenses like they weren't there. But the most shocking moment came when the UES Retribution actually rammed the enemy vessel, her armored prow punching completely through the alien ship's hull. As the two vessels locked together, Captain Santos ordered boarding teams to cross over and eliminate any surviving hostiles. The Zorvani watched in stunned silence as human Marines, protected by nothing but atmospheric suits and personal weapons, fought their way through an enemy ship in zero gravity. When the engagement ended, the Devourer scout was not just defeated, it had been completely annihilated. More importantly, human boarding teams had captured Devourer technology and several enemy combatants for intelligence analysis. It was the first time in 300 years of warfare that the Zorvani had taken prisoners from the enemy. The aftermath of the battle transformed the relationship between humans and their alien allies. The Zorvani realized that they hadn't just gained military assistance, they had allied themselves with a species that approached warfare as a fundamental expression of their nature. The humans weren't fighting because they had to. They were fighting because it was what they were designed to do. Commander Zephyros requested a private meeting with Admiral Stone as the fleet entered the final week of their journey. The alien commander had been studying human tactical doctrine and had reached conclusions that both excited and terrified him. Admiral Stone, Zephyros began carefully, our analysis of your species' military capabilities has revealed something unprecedented. Your weapons technology, while primitive by our standards, achieves destruction ratios that exceed our theoretical maximums. How is this possible? Admiral Stone smiled grimly. Commander, when you've spent your entire evolutionary history on a planet where everything is trying to kill you, you learn to build tools that actually work. We don't just want to win battles, we want to make sure the enemy can never threaten anyone again. The final week of the journey was spent in intensive planning sessions as both species prepared for what promised to be the largest space battle in galactic history. The Devourers were approaching Zorva Prime with a fleet that numbered in the thousands, including massive world-killer ships that could crack planets. Against them stood the combined might of the Zorvani's remaining forces and humanity's entire space fleet. The odds were overwhelming, but as Admiral Stone addressed the combined fleet before they dropped out of hyperspace, her words carried a confidence that surprised even the humans who heard them. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored Zorvani allies, she began, we're about to engage an enemy that has terrorized this galaxy for centuries. They expect us to fight like every other species they've encountered, with restraint, with measured responses, with fear. They have no idea what they're about to face. We are the children of a death world, and we're about to show them exactly what that means. As the fleet prepared to drop back into normal space at the edge of the Zorva Prime system, every human aboard the 47 ships understood that they were about to participate in something unprecedented. They were not just fighting for their alien allies, they were representing their entire species in its first galactic war. The reputation of humanity among the stars would be decided by what happened in the next few hours. The countdown to fleet emergence began, and across the human vessels, Marines checked their weapons one final time. Pilots ran final systems checks, and commanders reviewed battle plans that would have been incomprehensible to any peaceful civilization. Humanity was about to announce its presence on the galactic stage, and they intended to make that announcement with the only language they had ever truly mastered, the language of absolute, uncompromising war. The moment the combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zorva Prime system, every human aboard the 47 ships understood that they were looking at something beyond their worst nightmares. The Devourer fleet stretched across space like a plague of metal locusts, their dark ships blotting out entire star fields. Intelligence reports had estimated their numbers in the thousands, but the reality was far worse. Nearly 10,000 vessels hung in the void, ranging from fighters the size of human destroyers to massive world killers that dwarfed anything in human imagination. At the center of this nightmare, Armada was something that made even hardened human Marines stop and stare. The Devourer hive ship was a construct so massive that it generated its own gravitational field, its twisted spires and organic-looking hull suggesting something that had grown rather than been built. According to Zorvani intelligence, this single vessel contained more firepower than most galactic civilizations possessed in their entire fleets. "Sweet Mother of Mercy," whispered Captain Santos from the bridge of the UES Retribution. "How many ships are we looking at?" "Sensors are reading 9,743 distinct vessels," reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Hayes. "Mass displacement is—" "Christ, Captain, some of those things are bigger than asteroids." Admiral Stone's voice cut through the shocked silence across all human vessels. "All ships, this is Stone. I know what you're seeing looks impossible. I know the odds look like something out of a nightmare. But remember this. Every single one of those ships is filled with an enemy that has spent 300 years believing they're unbeatable. Today we're going to teach them exactly how wrong they are." The Zorvani fleet, elegant and powerful as it was, numbered barely 300 vessels. Even with their technological superiority, they were outnumbered more than 30-1. Under normal circumstances, any military strategist would have recommended immediate withdrawal. But these weren't normal circumstances, and humanity had never been accused of being a normal species. Commander Zephyros established a communication link with Admiral Stone as both fleets prepared for what promised to be their final battle. The alien commander's voice carried centuries of accumulated weariness and defeat. "Admiral Stone, our long-range sensors are detecting movement throughout their fleet. They're preparing to advance on Zorva Prime. Our remaining orbital defenses won't hold them for more than a few hours." Stone's response was calm, almost conversational. "How long do you need to evacuate your civilian population?" "To fully evacuate Zorva Prime? At least 12 hours. Admiral, with respect, there is no tactical scenario where our combined fleets can hold the Devourers for that long." There was a pause before Stone replied, and when she did, her words carried the quiet confidence that had made her humanity's first interstellar admiral. "Commander, you're thinking like someone who fights to minimize losses. We fight to eliminate threats. There's a difference." The human battle plan, when it was finally transmitted to the Zorvani commanders, violated every principle of galactic military doctrine. Instead of establishing defensive positions and attempting to delay the enemy advance, the humans intended to do something that no civilized species had attempted in recorded history. They planned to attack the entire Devourer fleet simultaneously. The strategy was simplicity itself in concept and utterly insane in execution. The 47 human vessels would split into 7 groups, each targeting a different section of the enemy formation. Rather than attempting to match the Devourer's superior firepower, they would close to point-blank range and engage in the kind of brutal, ship-to-ship combat that had defined human warfare for millennia. Dr. Chen, monitoring communications from her position aboard the UES Relentless, watched as human commanders refined their attack plans with the kind of enthusiasm most species reserved for festivals. Captain Morrison was discussing ramming speeds with his navigation officer. Commander Walsh was calculating explosive yields for something called boarding torpedoes. Captain Rivera was actually laughing as she explained her plan to use her ship's mining charges as improvised weapons. "Dr. Chen," came Veltar's voice over the communication system, "are your people aware that this battle plan has a projected survival rate of less than 3%? Chen looked around the bridge of the Relentless, where human crew members were checking weapons and making final preparations with the kind of grim determination she had seen in documentaries about humanity's greatest military victories. "Ambassador, I don't think they care about survival rates. They care about making sure the Devourers never threaten anyone again." The battle began exactly 18 minutes later, when the Devourer fleet detected the Allied presence and began their advance toward Zorva Prime. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations, though many would argue that it wasn't really a battle so much as a demonstration of what happened when an unstoppable force met an utterly immovable one. Commander Rivers, leading the first human attack group in the UES Indomitable, opened communications to his squadron as they accelerated toward the enemy fleet at velocities that made Zorvani navigators physically ill. "All ships, remember the plan. Get in close, hit them hard, and don't stop hitting them until they're scrap metal. Today we show the galaxy what Deathworlders are capable of." The Devourers, accustomed to enemies that maintained safe distances and relied on long-range weapons, were completely unprepared for ships that actually accelerated toward incoming fire. Human vessels, their hulls reinforced with layers of armor that would have been considered excessive by any reasonable standard, punched through Devourer defensive formations like bullets through paper. The UES Indomitable was the first human ship to reach the enemy line, and her assault set the tone for everything that followed. Rather than engaging at the maximum range of her weapons, Rivers ordered his ship to close to less than 100 meters from a Devourer heavy cruiser. At that range, human weapons designed for asteroid mining and ship salvage proved devastatingly effective against alien armor. "Target their bridge structure," Rivers ordered his weapons officer. "Let's see how they handle a close-range plasma cutter." The Devourer ship, built for long-range dominance, had no defenses against an enemy vessel that was literally scraping against its hull. Human weapons, crude by galactic standards but designed for maximum destructive potential, carved through alien armor like it was made of foil. Within seconds, the enemy cruiser was venting atmosphere and debris across space. But the most shocking moment came when Captain Santos implemented the boarding tactic that had been dismissed as impossible by every Zorvani military advisor. The UES Retribution, her hull scarred by enemy weapons but still functional, actually rammed a Devourer destroyer and locked the two vessels together with magnetic grapples. "Boarding parties, go!" Santos ordered, and 200 human Marines launched themselves into space wearing nothing but atmospheric suits and carrying weapons that looked primitive compared to galactic standards. What they lacked in technological sophistication, they made up for with something the Devourers had never encountered: the absolute determination of a species that had learned to fight everything that threatened their survival. The Devourers, ancient and experienced in galactic warfare, had never faced an enemy that actually boarded their ships. Their vessels weren't designed for internal combat. Their crews weren't trained for hand-to-hand fighting, and they had no tactical doctrine for dealing with enemies who brought the battle inside their own ships. Human Marines, trained in zero-gravity combat and equipped with weapons designed to function in the vacuum of space, turned devourer ships into floating battlefields. The aliens found themselves facing an enemy that didn't just want to disable their vessels. Humans wanted to eliminate every hostile presence and claim the ships for themselves. Dr. Chen watched the tactical displays with a mixture of awe and horror as human forces systematically dismantled enemy formations, using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Human ships were taking damage that would have destroyed most vessels, but their crews kept fighting with mechanical persistence that bordered on the supernatural. The turning point came when Admiral Stone, commanding the UES Unconquerable, led a direct assault on the Devourer hive ship itself. The massive alien construct was protected by hundreds of smaller vessels and weapon systems that could vaporize entire fleets. Any reasonable military strategist would have designated it as an impossible target. Stone's approach was elegantly simple. Rather than attempting to fight through the defensive screen, she ordered every human vessel in her attack group to focus their fire on a single point of the hive ship's hull. Concentrated plasma cutters, mining charges, and improvised explosive devices created a breach that allowed human forces to enter the enemy's most powerful vessel. What happened inside the Devourer hive ship became the stuff of legend. 3,000 human Marines, fighting in corridors designed for creatures twice their size, systematically worked their way toward the vessel's command center. The Devourers, ancient and powerful as they were, had never faced enemies who fought with the desperate efficiency of creatures who had evolved on a death world. The battle raged for 6 hours, and when it ended, the Devourer fleet was not just defeated, it had been annihilated. Of the nearly 10,000 enemy vessels that had threatened Zorva Prime, fewer than 100 managed to escape into hyperspace. The rest had been destroyed, captured, or abandoned by crews who had learned to fear the small ships that attacked with suicidal determination. But the true measure of human effectiveness wasn't in the ships they had destroyed. It was in the ships they had captured. 47 human vessels had managed to take control of more than 300 Devourer ships, including the massive hive ship itself. Human boarding tactics had proven so effective that they had literally captured a fleet larger than most galactic civilizations possessed. The aftermath of the battle left the Zorvani struggling to understand what they had witnessed. Their graceful, technologically superior vessels had supported the human assault, but it was clear that the primitive ships from Earth had been the decisive factor. The humans had not just won a victory. They had demonstrated a completely new form of warfare that turned every engagement into a zero-sum game. Ambassador Veltar found Admiral Stone aboard the captured hive ship, where human engineers were already working to reverse-engineer Devourer technology. The alien diplomat was struggling to process the implications of what humanity had accomplished. Admiral Stone, Veltar began carefully, our initial intelligence reports indicated that the Devourers were a nearly unstoppable force. How did your people achieve such a complete victory? Stone looked around the massive command chamber, where human technicians were cataloging alien technology with the same methodical efficiency they had shown in combat. Ambassador, the Devourers made the same mistake that most galactic civilizations probably make. They assumed that more advanced meant more dangerous. Where we come from, evolution teaches you that the most dangerous predator isn't always the biggest or the most technologically advanced. Sometimes it's the one that refuses to quit fighting. The integration of captured Devourer technology would transform human capabilities overnight. Ships that had been held together with improvised repairs and desperate innovation were suddenly equipped with faster-than-light drives, energy weapons that could crack planets, and defensive systems that made them nearly invulnerable. But more importantly, humanity had announced its presence on the galactic stage in a way that no civilization could ignore. Within weeks of the Battle of Zorva Prime, diplomatic delegations from across the galaxy began arriving at Earth. Some came seeking alliances with the species that had accomplished the impossible. Others came to assess whether humanity represented a threat to galactic stability. All of them came with the understanding that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Dr. Chen found herself appointed as Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council, a position that had been created specifically to accommodate humanity's unique status. During her first address to the assembled representatives of 47 civilizations, she was asked to explain humanity's military philosophy. "Honored delegates," she began, "there seems to be some confusion about human military doctrine. Many of you have asked whether we are a warrior species or a peaceful one. The answer is that we are survivors. We fight not because we enjoy violence, but because our planet taught us that sometimes fighting is the only way to protect what matters." The question that followed would define humanity's relationship with galactic civilization for generations to come. A representative from the Kethiani Collective asked, "Ambassador Chen, given your species' demonstrated capabilities, what assurance can you provide that humanity will not become a threat to peaceful civilizations?" Chen's response became known as the Death World Doctrine. "We fight for the same reason we explore, we build, and we create. Because our world taught us that the universe is vast, dangerous, and full of wonders worth protecting. We will stand with anyone who shares that belief, and against anyone who threatens it." The months that followed the Battle of Zorva Prime saw the emergence of what historians would later call the Terran Protocols, a new framework for galactic military cooperation that incorporated human tactical doctrine. Species across the galaxy began requesting human military advisors, not because they wanted to become more aggressive, but because they wanted to learn how to fight with the kind of determination that made victory inevitable. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity itself. The successful defense of Zorva Prime had proven that Earth's children could stand among the stars as equals to civilizations that had explored the galaxy for millennia. The 47 ships that had left Earth as an experimental force returned as the core of what would become the Terran Space Fleet, the most feared and respected military organization in galactic history. Admiral Stone, reviewing the mission reports as Earth came into view on the main screen, allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They had answered the call for help from desperate aliens, and in doing so, they had discovered something profound about themselves. Humanity was not just another species struggling to survive in a hostile universe. They were the apex predators of a death world, and they had finally found their place among the stars. The message from the Zorvani had asked for help from the survivors of a death world. What they had received was something far more valuable, an ally that would never accept defeat. Never stop fighting for what was right, and never allow any threat to go unanswered. The galaxy had learned to respect the children of Earth, and the universe had become a much safer place for any civilization that valued peace, freedom, and the right to exist among the stars.